Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. We start this week with President Trump declaring the opioid crisis a public health emergency. The declaration, which lasts 90 days, allows the Department of Health and Human Services to dedicate more resources to treat addiction. And in addition, the president said there would be a major ad campaign to get people to not begin taking opioids in the first place, to require better training in the prescribing of opioids, increased federally aided efforts to develop non-addictive painkillers, waiving of a rule that forbade Medicaid from paying for addiction treatment in many rehab facilities, and greater efforts to block shipments of the synthetic opioid fentanyl from China. So now, critics of this, there were critics of this speech, took issue, I think, with the president for three main reasons, in my estimation, and I thought we'd kind of go through them one by one. And then, Jay, if you have any,
I'd say four main reasons.
Okay.
My fourth after you're done. But
I'll give you my three. We'll figure out what the fourth one is. But the first thing is, I think, waiting so long to declare a public health crisis when, as the president himself said, this is the worst drug crisis in world history, with 1 million Americans using heroin last year and more than 11 million abusing prescription opioids. So, Jay, what do you think? Is that a fair criticism?
Again, I would say my whole take on this, after you get through the 3 points, is going to be, to some extent, how much can the government do that it hasn't been doing already? Does declaring the emergency really change things that dramatically? I mean, if this is a matter of, we just could have fixed this problem if we just declared an emergency. Again, I think that's just that's sort of a liberal view of the, if the government just says something's a problem and throws enough money at it, it'll fix itself. No, I mean, could you have done something earlier? Sure, I suppose. Will it have radically changed where we are now? No, probably not. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't start now. So
okay, well, I think that kind of plays right into the second criticism that I saw, is that some people arguing that the president should have declared this a national emergency instead of a public health crisis. And it's a technical designation, but basically what a national emergency declaration would mean is it would be more open-ended, and it would potentially allow for greater federal aid than the designation that President Trump actually used. And so obviously your point about, or your objection to the first criticism would apply very much here as well, I would assume. Yeah.
Well, and also I would say with the broader designation, you get into pulling into funds that are also have sort of already been overtapped because of natural disasters.
Okay, yeah, right. That's absolutely a good point. Now, I guess my third point, the third criticism I've seen, is that a lot of folks were very disappointed that President Trump didn't call for additional funding to combat the crisis, which, I mean,
that's always the big disappointment.
Well, I think that's very much should be. I mean, there are various experts have tried to come up with cost estimates for what it would cost to kind of address this problem in a significant way. And all of those estimates are in the tens of billions of dollars a year, more than what's already being spent. Now, to be fair to the president, he did say he was waiting for the final report of his opioid commission, and that's due out, I believe, next week, at which point he would make more specific recommendations. Now, so in a sense, I share.
And also the money to be spent, as I understand it, is still an increase over what prior spending had been.
Right. I mean, there's definitely going to be an increase. Now, we don't really know the details yet. It seems, in a way, it almost seems odd to me that the president would make this announcement the week before his commission released its final report. It would seem to me that the smart thing to do would have been to wait another week and then come out with the announcement and say, here's what my commission recommended, and here's what I'm going to do. Here's my more. So I don't really get, I guess, what they call the messaging aspects of this. I don't see the difference between waiting a week or not. But in any case, that's just puzzling to me. Okay,
because you get 2 weeks of good press. as opposed to one.
Well, I don't think he got 2 weeks of good press. I mean, maybe the press you were reading, but I think in a lot of the mainstream media, there were a lot of critiques about, well, this isn't going to do anything in of itself or a whole lot. But because we need to spend a lot more money, we need to, as you call it, throwing money at the problem. I would say in investing in taking care of these people who are subject to this awful addiction crisis. But before we get a little more into that, we want to thank our first sponsor for today is ZipRecruiter. If you're looking for great talent for your business but you're short on time, you do not have to slog through a huge stack of resumes to find your perfect hire. You just need the right tools, smarter tools. And with ZipRecruiter, you can post your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards with just one click. So you can rest easy knowing your job is being seen by the right candidates. And then ZipRecruiter has this smart matching technology. They, actively notify qualified candidates about your job within minutes of the time you post it, so you get the best possible matches. And that's why they're different, because unlike other hiring sites, ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on the right candidates finding you. It goes out and finds them. And you can even get a head start on your interviewing process by adding, particular screening questions to your job post to help you identify the most qualified candidate. And so, considering all that, it's no wonder that 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. And they've got this easy to use dashboard that lets you manage your hiring process from start to finish all in one place. So find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by growing businesses of all sizes and industries to find the most qualified job candidates with immediate results. And right now, Politics Guys listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free, as in no cost. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/politicsguy. That's ZipRecruiter.com/politicsguy. And for the third time, to try it for free, go to ZipRecruiter.com/politicsguy. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Okay, so Jay, obviously you think that this is, you talk about throwing money at the problem, and I wanted to get so I guess I'm trying to understand what you're saying. So are you saying that we do not need to devote more government resources to what even President Trump and almost everyone across the board is calling a crisis, and like I said, 1 million Americans using heroin last year, more than 11 million abusing prescription opioids. I mean, if this isn't a problem that cries out for
I'm saying we should be realistic about the ability to solve this problem with money, and especially money sent the way it is. And I'm sorry, I'm shuffling my papers because I've got my actual facts here. According to the it was now I can't analysis from the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration indicated that of those people that they surveyed who were taking painkillers and heroin, 9 in 10 did not feel that they needed treatment.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that.
So I mean, I guess the thing is, okay, well, let's spend more money for treatment. How do you get these people in there? I mean, I'm not saying this is an easy problem. What I'm saying is money doesn't necessarily solve it. The other thing that I think we just need to be realistic about is where this is taking place. The pushing to address the prescription issue. That's already sort of been done, and again, the numbers show that the addiction to prescription painkillers peaked in 2012. The problem now is what's filled in its place, being the fentanyl and heroin. So, and when you're talking about things like stronger interdiction of blocking fentanyl from China, yeah, I think that's a good idea. And to the extent we spend resources there, I think that's probably well spent. But I'm just, I guess I just sort of always take a step back when we simply say, oh, this is an emergency, we're going to spend more money, that the problem will somehow just be fixed. And I think, again, there's the idea that folks are just somehow innocently duped into this. And there's a lot of, Trump drew some heat a couple weeks ago for saying that the best, thing to do with opioids is not to start. And that's good advice. I mean, that's,
Well, it's good advice. It's
how do you
kind of
argue with that?
it's sort of worthless advice too. I mean, sure, it's absolutely
Worthless
true.
advice.
It's
I mean,
vice. Okay,
I took it. I mean, I think that's, I don't,
just say no. I mean, that's
yeah, exactly. And everyone criticized Nancy Reagan. Just say no. It's dumb and simplistic. But let's compare the drug usage, drug addiction numbers from the 1980s to today. And I mean, I think there's something to be said for that. And another piece of this that I think is something that people should realize is Medicaid beneficiaries, and this is based on a 2016 study from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Medicaid beneficiaries are prescribed painkillers twice the rate of non-Medicaid patients. They're 1 in 3 Medicare Part D beneficiaries receives an opioid prescription. And some of these beneficiaries received more than 120 milligrams a day for at least 3 months. And this would point to there is some sort of, I mean, the government, sort of opened the doors on a lot of this.
wow.
And,
I
they
think
should clean it up. But another way to look at this is to start having some better oversight of Medicaid programs.
The government, huh? The
Which
government
is one of the things that pushed these drugs out there in the first place.
The government is prescribing these drugs. That's fascinating to me. I think that's
No,
so
I'm not saying the
entirely
government's
wrong.
prescribing these drugs, but it's the government's paying for them, and it's the government's lack of oversight that has allowed people to defraud the system and get these drugs for free, which they can then resell and fueling the problem. So I'm if you want to say what we need is more government involved, well, I mean, let's fix the government that's involved right now first.
Well, there absolutely needs to be more oversight. There absolutely needs to be, stronger regulations on prescribing these things. And but that holds true whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, Humana, Aetna, Blue Cross, you name it. So, I mean, I feel like conservatives are using this oftentimes to just take a shot at Medicare and Medicaid. And, I guess if you want to do that, you can do that. But to me, that misses the broader problem. And yes, we definitely need stronger guidelines on prescribing. We talked about an article I believe I recommended from last week. Making it a law was passed in Congress not that long ago, making it a lot harder for the FDA to stop suspicious shipments. And now people are looking at that after that became a big story. It only became a big story when the Washington Post and 60 Minutes did an expose, and that was certainly
well, you and I, we could do a whole show on that and the guy who's pushing this and who his current employers are. But there's also, keep in mind that law is something that passed literally unanimously in both houses and was signed by President Obama. And it was based on a real problem regarding some DEA overreaches. But setting that aside, I mean, again, my point is, I think a lot of the criticisms, and this was going to be my fourth reason to add to your criticisms, is the guy who proposed this emergency or who declared it. His name is Donald J. Trump, and regardless of what he's going to do, he will be criticized for it. He would have been criticized if he had not declared an emergency. He would be just criticized now. If he spent it doesn't matter how much he spends; it would never be enough. So I think we're coming down to the point of, in so much drug addiction, there's sort of a liberal view of, if we just spend enough money, this will go away, and I think many conservatives rightly see it as more of a moral, even spiritual issue that you have to address. You have to address people, and it's not just it's not just throwing money. It's changing attitudes. It's changing minds. it's changing incentives, all that. So I think it's fine that he declared an emergency. I don't think it's going to really make a huge difference. Will it help with the margins? I think sure.
Well, I think it's an unfair characterization to say that liberals think that you can just throw money at the problem and it'll go away. I mean, I certainly don't think that, and many of the liberals that I know don't think that. I think we certainly acknowledge the fact that people in economically devastated regions with no good job prospects, oftentimes from broken families, they are more likely to turn to drugs and things like that, and that's obviously a tragedy, and we need to be concerned about these larger things. But that's part of the issue. Certainly, that's more fundamental. But
And actually, those predictors, again, according to this U.S. Drug survey, are higher predictors for opioid addiction than having been prescribed opioids as a painkiller.
Sure, and that's one part of it.
That's exactly my point. Yeah.
But my point is that we have at least, according to the president, we have at least 12 million people who have issues with opioids, just opioids. And obviously, if we look at other drugs, that's even more. And,
as I understand, though, when they're talking opioids at this point, when they're using the broader term and they're including fentanyl and heroin. So, I mean, we're not just talking prescription opioids. We're talking prescription and,
I'm just going by
market.
what the president said. And the president said that we have more than 11 million people abusing prescription opioids and 1 million Americans using heroin last year. So that's what I'm going by. And if you add in things like crystal meth and other things like that, that's even bigger. And so, you mentioned that, okay, let's say that 90% of these people, if according to one survey, and of course we'd always want to be skeptical of just a single survey, say that they don't necessarily feel like they need help. But even 10% of at least 12 million, that's not an insignificant number of people. I'm sure you'd agree. And so, I think we have an obligation to try to help these people who get sucked up into addiction. And there are things we can do. And there are things certainly that the president called for in this that I think are going to be helpful. It seems like finally the administration is getting on board with pushing for more medication-assisted treatment, and that's by far shown to be the most effective treatment for opioid addiction. But it's got this stigma because that idea of even former
because the idea is it essentially creates. I mean, what you have to do is you're giving other opioids to sort of take that down, so you can kind of ratchet it down.
Right, exactly. But this has been proven across the board. There's no question that this is by far the most effective way to treat opioid addiction. But like I said, even someone like former HHS Secretary Tom Price saying, "Well, we're not going to give these people drugs to treat their drug addiction," but that's how it works. I mean, so you can't really deny the results. But apparently, some people want to do that. So, but anyway, it's a move in the right direction. I'm still withholding my final judgment to wait and see what the president's opioid commission comes up with and what specific recommendations the president has. I certainly hope this will lead to some sort of a bipartisan, at least somewhat bipartisan agreement to spend considerably more money to help the millions of Americans who are already in the thrall of the opioid and other drug addiction, and we'll just have to see.
Okay.
All right, moving on. As many of you may know, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, my beloved CFPB.
Favorite bureau.
Yeah, they're near and dear to my heart. And most weeks when I have the privilege of mentioning them, it's because they've struck yet another blow for consumers. Sadly, this week the news is just the opposite of that. Congress voted to rescind the CFPB rule that prohibited financial firms from forcing consumers to agree to arbitration of disputes, thereby denying them the ability to band together in class action suits to punish firms for malfeasance. Now, people on the right saw this as a major victory, pointing to a Treasury Department analysis, which concluded that the rule would have resulted in an additional 3,000 class action lawsuits and $500 million in defense fees over the next 5 years, costs that the administration says would be passed along to consumers. Now, I should point out that the Secretary of the Treasury is Steven Mnuchin, who used to work at Goldman Sachs. Now, I'm guessing I know how you feel about this one, Jay, but why don't you tell me anyway?
Well, I will. I think the Treasury report, and if you read it through, it's not just a matter of the Treasury report says here we have different numbers. They really do sort of a takedown of what the bureau's rationale had been for putting this rule in. In terms of what costs they added in, what costs they didn't, how likely people are to use them, how much they're going to get. The conservative concern about this has always been, and it's my concern, is that in many cases these class action suits are sops to the plaintiff's bar. Actual consumers see little, if nothing, as far as a victory goes. The money goes back to the government and or the class action plaintiffs' lawyers who make millions and billions on this. So, it's a big constituency of the Democrat Party, and this is not something that's new, and it's trying to expand mass torts for their benefit. So the other piece, though, that I think is fascinating and fun is Richard Cordray's letter response to Congress complaining about this, in which he points out, and this is Cordray writing, that of the bank contracts with consumers, only 50% of financial institutions have these required arbitration clauses. If you look at community banks, I think it's community banks, I don't have it in front of me, it's something like only 7% have arbitration clauses. So that sort of makes you wonder, well, is this that big a problem? If half of the banks out there do not have mandatory arbitration clauses in their customer agreements, well, then there's your market solution. Then if you don't like an arbitration clause, we'll go to somebody else. Yeah, I mean, again, that to me that screams that this was sort of a solution in search of a problem. And I think Congress did the right thing and knocking this out.
I couldn't disagree more with you, Jay, on this one. Now, first off, on that whole,
What did banks? Why do you hate banks? What did they ever do to you?
why do you hate consumers, Jay? What did they ever do to you?
Well, I'll go a lot of reasons to hate consumers, but don't get me started. We could do a whole show on that.
Well, let me respond to some of your comments, okay? So first off, that whole thing about Cordray rightly pointing out that I think it's around overall half of, like you said, half of all financial institutions don't have these. I think that's an important point, and the reason why he was making that point is to refute the idea that somehow somehow banks would be financial institutions would be at a competitive disadvantage and would incur additional costs that they would have to pass along to consumers. That seems fairly illogical if half of them are competing just fine, including some big ones. I believe Citibank doesn't have them, if I recall correctly, and they're doing just fine. So that's why he mentioned that in his letter. Now, secondly, your argument that, well, there's a market solution because practically right around half of the financial institutions don't have these. I would argue that's not really a market solution, because I think in the conservative analysis of this, there's too much of a belief that consumers are going into these arrangements like completely rational, wonkish, poring over the fine print toward people. I don't know of anyone. Maybe there are people out there. I don't know of anyone who, in looking for a loan or opening a bank account, says, wait a second, how does Citibank compare to Wells Fargo in terms of the binding arbitration? Maybe someone does that, but I would be really shocked. And so when it becomes, let me finish.
They probably don't, but there's also the idea of, if you have people who have somehow felt they've been wronged in the past, and they've run up against an arbitration clause, and they've said, this is unfair. I want to go to court with thousands of other people and receive $5 at the end of it. In that case, if those people feel they've been wronged, they can say, no, I'm now going to opt for a bank that doesn't have an arbitration clause.
Sure, and that's well after the fact, after the damage has been done. Now,
After
secondly,
they've lost their $5. Yeah.
well, I mean, and that's another thing that conservatives point to, and I think it's a true argument, but it's in part disingenuous. You know, you're absolutely right that the average award for arbitration is considerably higher than the average award for a class action. The figures I saw were the average award for a class action right around like $32 or something, for arbitration like $5,200, something like that. So there's a significant difference there. But in that analysis, in those figures that are pulled out there, there are two things that aren't often talked about, at least on the right, I don't think. The first of these is that a lot of people simply don't even bother to go through arbitration. They're intimidated. They don't go through the process, and so there are a lot fewer I don't know, call claims that are filed for arbitration because of that. Because it's a much more daunting thing, me going up against the company, that sort of thing. Now, secondly, and so right there, I think that's one important point. The second important point is that it relates to what the purpose of having class actions is. And yes, a big part of it certainly is to get compensation for the people who've been wronged. That's a big part of it. But another big part of it is to help prevent companies, to give companies a disincentive to do these kind of shady things in the future. And that's where class action suits can be very valuable. If a company can get hit with a big enough class action suit, well, they say, well, we're not going to do that again. It's not just the cost of doing business where we have to pay a few complainers a few $1,000s. Well, that's worth it as far as we're concerned. But if all of a sudden we have to worry about potentially multi-million, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, well, that becomes a real disincentive. In fact, I would go so far as to argue that if you're not a fan of regulation, this might actually be a better thing. Presumably, if we cut certain regulations but allowed people to file class action suits, there'd be a non-regulation heavy way for firms to act in the interest of the public because they'd be more inclined to self-police for fear of these lawsuits.
No, here's I think the point though that liberals and well, those who support this anti-arbitration movement miss is you're assuming that all the claims that are made are legitimate claims. There's a tremendous cost in class action litigation, and there is a tremendous pressure to just settle and pay, even when you have a meritorious defense. I think that's the bigger problem, is that class actions can be used as shakedowns, and the more this is available, the less you can, the more shakedowns you have, the more costs to everyone. I could give you some. We should just do a whole show on arbitration. I think that would be fun. We could do like a Wednesday arbitration show. But the sense is that it's not consumer friendly, and arbitration is not all that daunting in the real world. What it does do is requires the claimant to actually make some proof and not simply just be a name. And in so many class action suits, you don't even know that you're suing. You don't even know you're a plaintiff until after the case is over, and you get the letter saying you may be in a class that's entitled to this. So, again, 3 cheers for Congress in this, and Cordray will have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think you're somewhat wrong on a number of things, but I think you're more wrong on this than on most things, Jay. One thing
we are this. I just think it's odd. The thing we probably argue about most, and where we have the most vehement disagreements, is like bank arbitration. But
yeah, that is kind of, it's just something about us, I think. I don't know. But, one thing before we move on from this story, I wanted to point out is that a lot of these problems, at least as Republicans see them, are going to be self-limiting because Rob Corddry's term is getting close to being up. The CFPB head is a 5-year term, and Donald Trump is pretty soon going to have the opportunity to appoint a replacement. And I think it's fair to say that whoever is the who's running the CFPB next is not going to be nearly as much of a thorn in the side of financial institutions and conservatives as Rob Corddry's been.
Okay.
Well, you would agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Before I move on, we'd like to thank our newest supporter, Ann from Monroe, Wisconsin. She says she loved our recent interview with Dr. Luis Perez Breva, and she goes on to say, I think your podcast does such a fantastic job of covering both sides of the issue. I understand that you, Jay, and Trey are not going to agree on everything, like, arbitration, but I appreciate that it's done with respect and some truly good reasoning from everyone. You give me a lot to think about, and I like that. I'm tired of listening to programs that tend to support only one side of things, and I hate listening to call-in shows where a lot of people think it's a good opportunity to express their dissatisfaction and even hatred, but give little to no reasoning. Or the opposing side, unfortunately, usually conservative, she says, who come off sounding exactly like the other group seems to think we all are anyway. So thank you very much, Ann. We really appreciate your support. And, support of great listeners like Ann helps keep us going. And if you'd like to join her and help out the show, go to politicsguys.com and click on the Patreon link that you'll see there. Okay, moving on. This week, Arizona Republican Senator Jeff Flake, one of the harshest congressional critics of President Trump, announced that he will not seek re-election in 2018. Flake made the announcement in a 17-minute speech in which he commented with dismay on the casual undermining of our democratic ideals and the reckless, outrageous, and undignified behavior of President Trump. Now, Flake is extremely unpopular with Arizona voters, with one poll showing him only having 18% approval. He was facing a primary fight he probably couldn't have won, and even if he had, he would have come up against a strong Democratic Party opponent in the general election. Now, Flake's announcement comes not long after Tennessee Republican Senator and also Trump critic Bob Corker announced that he too would not seek re-election. So, Jay, is the moderates abandoning ship, or what do you make of this?
Well, I don't know. First of all, I'm not sure if it's fair to characterize Flake as moderate.
Or
I think
Corker, really, yeah.
You can say fairly claim as a moderate. But Flake did have more sort of a conservative background, although he was more moderate on immigration, which is what I think hurt him most in Arizona. I think a lot of this, I mean, sometimes I saw this written somewhere else, so I can't claim the phrase, but it's sort of in politics, people often make a virtue of necessity. I think that's sort of a little bit of this is Flake had a tough race in Arizona. I mean, I wouldn't even say a tough race for whatever reasons. I think some of the immigration part of it, he just never really caught on out there, and he had a tough race in 2012, and he would have a difficult time being reelected. And I think everyone realized that the writing was on the wall. So it was better to cut and get out, do something else, and open this up for what is typically going to be a Republican seat, for another Republican to hold it. So, I mean, I think in some respects he saw the writing on the wall, and you can read it as doing that. You can read it as taking one for the team. You can, and in the, he had to give a good reason. You can't get up and stand on the well of the Senate and say, I've decided I'm going to run for re-election, not run for re-election because I'm probably going to get beat. You want to make sort of a case of I'm stepping aside because of the tarnished politics of our time and so forth. So, he did what he had to do. I think it probably helps preserve a, for lack of a better word, establishment Republican holding that seat. I think the challenger from the Bannonistas is something of a Flake, and I think any other candidate will beat her. So.
Well, I wanted to point out that I said the moderates abandoning ship. Certainly, Jeff Flake, as you rightly pointed out, is no moderate. His lifetime rating for the American Conservative Union, they rate all legislators on being, well, conservative, as the name might suggest, is, I think, somewhere over 93, and Corker's is a little bit
God
over
bless him.
80. So yeah, these are not squishy kind of, Susan Collins type of people, right? So these are solid conservative type folks. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. And as you pointed out, I think you're right that Flake doing what he did is going to make it sort of taking one for the team in that sense. To me, the bigger picture is in 2018, there will be 33 Senate races. Now, of those 33, there are only 8 in which the incumbent is a Republican, right? Now, at this point already, two of those 8 Republicans have announced their retirement. Now, Steve Bannon previously said that Breitbart would essentially wage war against all of them in favor of more nativist, non-free trade supporting candidates, with one exception, that being Ted Cruz. So basically, of the 7 people that Bannon said we're going after, 2 of those 7 has said, I don't want any part of this. So, that's, I guess what I'm wondering is this a move towards more polarization, radicalization of the Republican Party, at least in the Senate?
I don't think so. And the reason I'm saying that is Bannon can talk a lot about, we're going to take on these guys, but he needs to have actual candidates to do so. And so far, the candidates he's come up with have been sort of just kind of kooks. For example, the woman who would be the primary challenger in Arizona is someone who has expressed a lot of interest in whether the government or someone else is poisoning us with airplane contrails. There have been others who are sort of 5-6 time losers, or the people who just like to run for stuff. So I don't think Bannon's going to have those candidates. And in a Senate race, having some sort of local connection is different than a national race where like a Donald Trump can jump in, and not everyone can be for whatever you want to say about him. Donald Trump does have a certain appeal about him, right? I mean, that's how he won the nomination. It's that's why he had a TV show. I mean, people like to watch him. And I don't think that's the same as that's going to carry over with some of these other candidates. You could point to Roy Moore winning in Alabama, and again, I'd say, well, that's a little different because, again, this isn't someone who just out of the blue that Bannon recruited, or was just sort of the regular neighborhood kook who runs for everything. He'd been a Supreme Court justice, Alabama Supreme Court justice. So he'd run for office there. He had a political operation. He was in the news. He had high name ID. So there was a lot of, very Alabama-centric, on-the-ground, regular reasons why he would win. And I just don't know that those factors are going to be there in these other races.
Well, I hope you're right, and I hope you're wrong in a way. There's certainly part of me that says, well, it would be great if some really radical, kooky sort of people could get Republican nominations, because it would give Democrats a better chance at knocking them off. But on the other hand, I recall myself over a year and a half ago saying, my God, wouldn't it be great if Donald Trump were the nominee? Because, the Democrats will be able to take Congress.
How could we lose?
Yeah, exactly. So I've become a little more careful about that way of thinking, because the public can do interesting things, that's for sure. So.
Well, no, let's wait and see. But I really think that if you remember, Ross Perot, after his run for president, there was this idea of he's going to start a reform party, and there's going to be all these reform candidates, and the same thing sort of fizzled, just because I think it's easier for someone to grab national attention and get that sort of national recognition than it is to win on a statewide basis. And for lots of reasons, mostly relating to the media and what they cover and what they don't cover. But
well, that makes sense to me. And actually, I'd like to think the better part of me agrees with you and hopes that you're right. because although from a partisan perspective, of course, I want to see more Democrats win seats, I think that we're all better off if sort of people with extreme views aren't even in that position where they could win seats. I like to think that both parties can sort of filter them out before it gets to that point. So, all right, well, moving on. Congress this week passed a budget blueprint, which is only important in that it clears the way for the Senate to move forward with tax reform without having to worry about a Democratic filibuster, meaning that they only need 50 votes to pass their tax cut legislation because, of course, Vice President Mike Pence can vote to break ties. But divisions are already emerging, even though not even a draft of this tax legislation has been put together. And at this point, the two main issues at this point appear to be, first off, 401k plans. The second issue being the deduction for state taxes. Now, initially, many Republicans hoped to pay for the tax cuts, at least in part, by putting a very restrictive cap on 401k contributions. Now, that wouldn't prevent people from saving for retirement, but it would force them to do it in accounts that are immediately taxable instead of taxable when the funds are withdrawn, as is the case with 401ks. In other words, it was a way to get the money up front, right? Now, that second contentious point, much more contentious, I think, in the end, is going to be the state tax deduction. There are many Republicans supporting it. The few Republicans from higher tax states don't like this idea at all. And given how close things are, especially in the Senate, where, of course, President Trump has kind of gone out of his way, sometimes it seems, to alienate a number of Republicans, this could really be decisive. Right now, the 10 highest tax states, they are represented by 17 Democrats and 3 Republicans. Those 3 Republicans, 2 from Iowa, 1 from Wisconsin. That can make a real difference. Now, the current plan, according to Senate leadership, is to have the legislation written in a matter of weeks and have a bill for President Trump to sign by the end of the year, which would be really shockingly fast for something so incredibly complex. To give you a way of comparison, the 1986 tax reform legislation took 7 months from introduction to signing. So, Jay, what are your thoughts on where we are with it right now?
I think we're going to get some sort of tax reform before the end of the year. I think there's the momentum is there. I think with these the state and local. I mean, well, Trump sort of has gone back and forth on this 401k issue. Originally, there were some folks. The House Budget Chairman had made indications the 401ks were on the table. Trump tweeted, "No, they're not." He has come back and said, "Well, no, they're not." Now we're not sure what the Senate's going to do with that. I think there's plenty of good reasons not to mess with 401k contributions. Just from both economic and ideological reasons, it's one of these things in the tax code that creates an incentive to do something that is really good for everybody. The state and local tax question, not quite as much, because what that does is creates an incentive or an ability for state and local governments to raise their taxes, knowing that it'll be subsidized by taxpayers from some other state. So look, in either case, I think there are ways that you can reach a compromise. That's sort of the good thing when you're talking about this kind of dollars and cents bill is, if you want to talk about caps, well, we can move the numbers up or down. If you want to talk about how much state and local taxes are deductible, well, we can set limits on that and set caps on that, and who gets to deduct them and who doesn't. So there's ways to do that. You can phase out deductions. I think the Republican lawmakers realize this is a do or die situation, and having an imperfect bill is going to be better than having no bill at all, with the exception of sort of like your Rand Paul types. So I think they're going to get there, and I think the House vote showed that you're going to get there. It was close, and I think that's the fact that it was a close vote. I think is a good sign, and I'll explain that in a minute. But go ahead.
Well, there was one, about the House vote. There was one House Republican who said, we were asked to vote for a budget that nobody believes in, so we have the chance to vote for a tax bill that nobody's read. And to me, this is the tragedy of the modern Congress. That, I mean, this, I think you're right. Something's going to happen. I mean, it's going to be some sort of tax cut, not really tax reform in the way I think would be more ideal. And it's going to happen so quickly. And I think that comparison to 86 is a good one. This is not the kind of thing you should push through in weeks. When Republicans decried Obamacare and some of the early Obama legislation being just pushed through very quickly, I think they had a point. But even then, we were talking months and months for that to get passed. Here, they're talking weeks. This is, John McCain made this point. This is no way to pass. This final bill is likely to be thousands of pages. And you're going to push it through in a matter of weeks because, we need something by the end of the year to get a win. That just makes me just shake my head in despair. And I'm blaming the Republicans right now because they're in power, but this has clearly been a bipartisan thing. I think the Republicans are taking it to a new level, but this to me just makes me wonder what are we going to do? I mean, this is just awful.
Well, I would say though, you can say the tax bill may be big and consequential, but in terms of complexity, what's been proposed, and again, none of us knows exactly what's going to be in it. We just have seen outlines and blueprints and so forth. Is the idea that there's going to be sort of a leveling of rates. There's going to be reductions in the marginal tax rates. There may or may not be an additional sort of millionaires tax, which would be sort of simply punitive, but it would serve a political end. And then you would make up for these lowering of rates by taking out loopholes, for example, the state and local tax deduction. So, I think the key parts are there, and people know what we're talking about. And I think this is much less complex than, say, Obamacare, when it was recreating a whole market and exchanges and mandates and Medicare expansion and a whole lot of other moving parts.
I don't buy it.
Look, it would be great if we could take more time. And
we can.
And Senator McCain's complaints about, I don't know. I don't recall him complaining as much about the process when we had the TARP bill and the stimulus bill out there. But
let's just talk. Let's look at his complaint. Let's look at his complaint, his point on its own merits, and try to separate it from Senator McCain's various issues.
Well, no, because it goes to his sincerity, though. But okay, but
yeah, let's put that aside. Let's put sincerity aside.
On the merits, should we take longer to debate tax reform? Sure, I suppose maybe we should.
Maybe we should. You don't think that fundamentally reworking the tax code is maybe something that is the fit for the regular order and shouldn't be pushed through reconciliation?
Well,
you can only give me a maybe
again,
on that.
You have to look at the situation as it is. Either you're not going to get, and I don't think anyone is Pollyannish enough to say that there would be a bipartisan tax reform bill that would not have to go through the reconciliation process. It's just not going to happen.
Why not?
And I think as a matter of national public policy, and me speaking as a Republican, and I think a lot of economists would agree, even liberal economists, we need tax reform, particularly corporate tax reform, to continue to be competitive in the world. We need it to happen sooner rather than later. And we can't just sit and wait, because if we do, it's not going to happen. And there's also the idea of Republicans elected these representatives to do this, and they didn't elect their representatives to. We want you to go and do this if it's okay with the Democrats too, and that's sort of the way democracy works. So
see, this to me isn't. This is exactly the way democracy does not work. Because I think this idea that, again, go back to 86. The 86 tax reform was passed on a bipartisan basis. Democrats and Republicans worked together. Now let's move forward. We move forward a couple of decades to Obama.
But there was a different dynamic in who was controlling the legislature and the presidency.
Yeah,
too.
Let me sort of finish my point here. But and then we go to the Obama administration. They made an attempt to work with Republicans. That didn't work. Then they ended up pushing it through. But now no one's even bothering to make that attempt. Is it possible that we couldn't find tax reform legislation that could garner enough bipartisan support to pass? Sure, but I think that is a fundamental indictment of the sickness in the system. The fact that more and more people say, you know what, it's my way or the highway. If you can't give me exactly 100% of what I want, you're not a real liberal, you're not a real conservative, and to hell with you. That, to me, that just abandoning even any attempt at that is fundamentally undemocratic, because the democratic system is not about saying, hooray for me, screw you, and it's going to be all my way, or I'm going to take my ball and go home. No, it's about, well, what can we work out here? What kind of deal can we make? I'm not going to be thrilled with this. Certain parts, you're not going to be thrilled, but understand that, in this legislature, there are a number of Democrats and a number of Republicans, and we need some from both parties to get something. So let's figure out something that we both can live with. And that's what's not happening. And that's what Republicans aren't even trying to do anymore. And a lot of Democrats too. And I just think that's just sad and disgusting.
Well, I think you have to live in the world in the real world that you live in. The 86 tax reform was bipartisan by necessity, because Democrats controlled the House and Republicans controlled the presidency. So there had to be some agreement there. In this case, I think it's just a game theory type situation. There is absolutely no advantage for any Democrat to sign on to any kind of Trump tax reform. They're going to face challenges from their left. Any compromise, it's so toxic with Trump or anyone. It will be seen as a betrayal. I don't think they can do it. So, I mean, I think Trump has reached out to Chuck and Nancy on this and other things. But I guess here's the thing: what potential compromise could be offered that Democrats would bite on? I mean, there's been the here's the proposed we do a millionaire's tax. We have this fifth tax bracket. The state and local reduction, getting rid of that, actually, that benefits rich people far disproportionately than it does others. So, yeah, I don't know. I think this is an ideological difference. They're not going to be bridged, and as Obama said, at some point, elections have consequences, and it'd be great if you could work together. But if you can't, again, I don't think you can just.
I understand what you're saying, but I think that
again, it's whenever Republicans are in office, when Democrats are in office, elections have consequences. When Republicans are in office, it's why can't you compromise? You're not compromising.
Well, that's
again, these folks didn't run on repeal and replace as long as it's okay with the Democrats. They ran on they were going to repeal and replace. So this is another example. They ran on tax reform, not tax reform if it's okay with Chuck Schumer. It'd be great if it were okay with Chuck Schumer, but it's not going to be. And that's the real world. And
you don't necessarily need Chuck Schumer. You might need Joe Manchin. You might need some other people. But again, I understand what you're saying. But if this is where we're at, if we just sort of live, as you put it, live in the world we're in, and just assume that everything is strategy and tactics and everything's a zero-sum game, then I think we've just lost what used to be good and important about American politics and American democracy. And maybe you're okay with that, but I'm not willing to get to that point. I'm not willing to not push people, to not hold both parties accountable for not at least making at least an effort to do that. So sure, maybe it doesn't work out in the end, but damn it, I believe that my representatives have an obligation to work with the others, at least try to work with the other side and make a good faith effort.
What would that effort look like?
Well, I don't know, but it would have to be something. You'd have to take a look at, get around the table and say, okay, what sort of things are crucial to you? What are less? I mean, it's negotiations. You don't really know.
The response so far has been, don't do any tax reform.
No, I don't think that's true at all. I think Democrats and Republicans.
Let me just point out the irony of this, because we began our discussion about the opioid situation, and the opioid bill that 60 Minutes has lambasted, where again that was a situation where everyone agreed, and there was broad bipartisan support. So to say everything is partisan, I think is a mistake. But look, taxes are going to be a partisan issue.
Sure. But let me give you an example. There is a certain amount of bipartisan agreement that we have some issues with our corporate tax rate. Now, Democrats and Republicans differ in terms of exactly how that needs to be changed, but there are a number of liberals who absolutely agree with conservatives that our corporate tax rate is too high and there are too many loopholes, and that so I would say that one
name one of them who's a U.S. senator, though.
Well, I mean, I'd have to, I can't do that offhand, but I know
there aren't any. Yeah, I mean,
well, you say that offhand? Because I'll go back and look, I guess, but I don't know that. Yeah, I see you're just willing to just dismiss that offhand, and I think that's exactly the sort of attitude that means that we're never going to get back to a better place with this, and I find it very disheartening.
All right, well,
on that disheartening note, we have run very long for today, so I think we'll wrap things up on that. Now, before we do you have anything for what we're reading this week, Jay? Kind of something to pull back and.
Oh my gosh. Can I just take a pass this week?
I think you can, absolutely.
I actually had a bunch of stuff, but I don't want to get into it now. And
sure.
It's sort of we can do it, and we've run long already. So
okay.
I'll hit you up next week.
All right. Well, yeah, I'll tell you what. Then we will my what we're reading thing can be held in abeyance for a week too. I think that's probably a good point. We've subjected people to enough for this week. So, all right, folks, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you liked what you heard, and that you will check out today's sponsor, ZipRecruiter, where Politics Guys listeners can post jobs for free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/politicsguy. Listener support is a huge help to us, and we really do appreciate it. If you're interested in joining our great group of Politics Guys supporters, just go to politicsguys.com and click on the Patreon link. And if you want to support the show without spending anything, it would be great if you could share this episode with your friends and followers, or pass along our new show posts and tweets on Facebook and Twitter. Also, leaving reviews and ratings on iTunes helps us out too. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can do that through mail@politicsguys.com or our Facebook page, facebook.com/politicsguys page. And we're also on Twitter @politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show was produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.